Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's get started here. It is Tuesday, April 13th, 2021, and market is still just continuously, relentlessly pushing to higher highs. We did have a significant correction in the overnight, which really was just kind of a retrace of all of Monday's push back up, if you could even call it that. And then just around 5:30, we ended up coming to retrace back up, and now we are just a few points away from the all-time high. So really incredible what the bulls have been able to do here. And let's get started with our morning analysis. And because we are just pushing and pushing here, I will be looking at pretty much every time frame, all the way up. And first I want to look at my quarterly chart. And again, from this perspective here, we've just got a very strong bullish sentiment and really no signs of a reversal. So I was telling everyone before we got started here that I will usually get some indication of a reversal on these higher time frames when we start to get that more with the larger pullback. We're talking 100, 200, 300 point pullback. You'll typically see an indication on your higher time frames. And so if we look back here, back to, this is August of 2018, you can see that we had a really glaring divergence where we pushed to a higher high in price, and really it wasn't by much, but we pushed just a little higher. You could even argue from the close of the bar that we had on February of 2018, we pushed significantly higher, and then on RVI we had this significant push lower. From that point, we dropped from 2880 to 2280. So we had a 600 point drop after we got that indication from this candle on August 2018. All right, after that huge drop, which I remember, it started in October of 2018, and it was one of the most volatile times that I had seen on the S&P, because I started trading back in around 16, and there really had been no significant drop in the S&P up until that point. So this was a really volatile time. But anyway, we can then see that the next significant drop, which happened to be when everything kind of shut down for COVID, and there were all these really bad indications about the global economy, potential supply chain problems with China, all kind of thing like that. And with the market pushed up again, and really you could argue that the close of November 2019 and the open of February of 2020 was fairly close, but it was still higher, and we did have the overall wick push higher here. And if you look at the RVI, we pushed significantly lower. So when this bar closed on February of 2020, we had a really good indication that we were going to have a large sell-off in the market. And sure enough, in March, when the shutdowns began in the U.S., that's when we saw a push from, let's just say, from the high of February of 2020 around 33.30, we pushed all the way down to 21.30. So we're talking, 1,000 points or more, and that was a really significant sell-off. But we did recover really quickly. We had that, what they like to call the V-shaped recovery. I mean, pretty much once we hit that 21.30 area, we took off and just kept making new all-time highs once we broke the high we made in February of 2020, or at least in this quarterly bar. And so now if we look to what we're doing right now, you can see that we've pushed up. If you look from the body perspective up, and from the wick, we've pushed up, and the RVI has also pushed up. And so there's absolutely no sign of reversal like we got back in August of 2018, and then over here in February of 2020. And so because we do not have the same indication right now, that's telling me that we are not going to have a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1,000 point sell-off from this point. That doesn't mean we might not have 100 or 200 point, But from this quarterly perspective, it's just not telling me that we're going to have the pullback like we saw back in October of 2018 and then over here in March of 2020. Now, when we jump down to the monthly, I also do want to cover some of these more significant sell-offs. Again, it looks like it was the September 2018 bar where we got the indication that there could be a pullback, and we got this really big, whatever it was, 600-point pullback. Then we got another indication in July of 2019, which led to about a 200-point pullback, maybe a little more than 200 points. And then finally, that February 2020 bar, we got another clear indication of a bearish exhaustion pattern, and the market pulled back that, whatever it happened to be, 1,200 points. Right now, we're pushing to make higher highs, but the indicator is also pushing to make higher highs. So at the moment, in the middle of the month right now, this bar still has basically 2.5 weeks to go, is still not really showing me any signs of bearishness. And we will have to monitor this as we go forward to see if that picture starts to change, because this RVI where it is right now can change when this bar finally closes at the end of the month. But right now, still really no indication. So from a quarterly and a monthly perspective, we do not have those reversal signals that we had when we had the really significant sell-offs in the past. Now, when we jump down to the weekly as well, you can look back to the significant sell-offs. Let's just look at the February 2020 21 sell-off where we had, okay, this is weekly. I'm reading that as a year. So back in February of 2020, we had this push to a higher high, and then on the indicator is very slight, but we made a lower high, and from there we have the sell-off. Now, right now, we do not have that indication at all. I mean, you can compare it to the previous high we made back in February, and you can argue that because we're slightly lower here, we do have the beginnings of what could be a bearish exhaustion pattern here. But ideally, what I would like to see is from the previous high. So from this previous high, we do not have that indication. You see that we've pushed up in price, and the RVI has also pushed up almost exactly the same. And so from this weekly perspective, we also do not have any clear signs of a pullback like we did back for the huge sell-off during COVID. Then if we go all the way back, even for this significant sell-off here, we got to push higher and we got to push lower on the indicator, right? So we've got really nothing like that happening at the moment. And so that's why I keep telling everyone that I'm skeptical of a strong pullback. Quarterly, monthly, weekly have no signs. Now, when we start to jump down to what I call my regular high time frames, my daily, my 4-hour, we do have some indications of some exhaustion going on, because you can see yesterday coming into today, we pushed higher, and it's kind of hard to see here, but the open of, let's see, the body of this candle, the top was 41.21, and the top here is 41.24, and so, overall, we have pushed higher, and so has the indicator, right? We've pushed up. Now, the problem is we pushed a little bit higher going into yesterday, or into the overnight. So in the overnight, we ended up pushing to make a higher high, but now on the daily, I'm starting to see a pullback on RVI. Now, we have all day for this to develop, and so this is just the beginning of this candle. And this picture could change where we do end up maybe pushing a little further, and then this RVI that we see right here that's kind of tilting down could then actually close and be a little further up like that. And so we don't have any kind of reversal. But if we end up kind of staying in here today, and the bar is higher than the previous bar, and this RVI ends up closing and it closes down here, then we will have an indication of a potential exhaustion pattern from a daily perspective. And so we might start to get on these shorter time frames the beginnings of an indication of some exhaustion, and we might get a pullback. But again, we need to dial down to all the time frames and start to build that case, because everything looks bullish on the super high time frames. So let's go down and see what the 4 hour is kind of showing. And sure enough, that push to the new all-time high in the overnight session did give us a exhaustion pattern that, as you guys can see on the market, when we got to that all-time high, which was, let me get the number here, 41.27, the market then sold off pretty violently in the overnight. And so from that 4 hour, which basically closed, so the close of the 4 hour was 41.2650. And so when that bar closed, you were all the way up here. And so you had an indication that we could potentially get a pullback. And it did, sure enough, pull back all the way basically to the low of Monday. Although you can argue kind of the highs we were making, at least from the overnight on Friday. And so we pulled back and then just zooted right back up, especially off that 5:30 news. I'm not sure what happened at 5:30. I'm guessing they'll argue some type of news came out, and from there we've just launched from the sell-off overnight all the way back up pretty much to the all-time high. So this 4 hour signal, in my opinion, is now basically over here. We've already got the pullback, which ended up being over 25 points. So you got a 25 point pullback, and then we retraced all of it, and you can see this candle now on the 4 hour now has a huge wick on the bottom end, with all these trapped sellers, and now we're all the way back to the all-time high. So this picture, again, remember this 4 hour closes at 7 a.m. Pacific, so we have until a half hour after the open for this to develop. And so preferably, or actually what makes sense here is if we don't break the high from the overnight, then everything looks normal on the 4 hour. If we do actually break the overnight high, which is our new all-time high, this ideally should push higher. So this RVI should at least slope up just a little, even if it's just very slight, needs to slope up just a little bit. Otherwise, we'll start to get an indication from, I like to call it under the hood of the market, that there could be more pullback to come. But again, remember, the 4 hour and the daily are kind of telling us that. We kind of have to monitor these two. And then our super high time frames still all look very bullish. So let's see what we can kind of build up here with our intermediate time frames. And so from the intermediate time frame perspective, let me see the high here. So, arguably we made a higher high on this next candle. We got a little bit of a higher high on the RVI. Really no indication of a pullback like the 4 hour gave us, but it did get a significant drop. Now what I'm actually noticing here is that we came down to make this lower low compared to the previous swing low on the market, but we made a higher low here. So I'm kind of, let me mark this as well, I'm kind of getting this kind of bullish indication here. But remember, we did get that huge push, especially off the 5:30 news. And so this bullish indication could now be pretty much over with. We basically missed the ball here, and it already made the push that we could have expected because of what RVI was telling us. Now, right now, we do have the opposite indication going on where we have a lower high, but a higher high. So we are it's getting a little bit tricky here. But I will try to tie it all together as we build the smaller time frames, and then we come back and we kind of review everything that we've been talking about. So right now we had a pretty clear bullish push, and we're going to see this indication on the shorter time frames because I remember marking it during my morning forecast. And so this indication is carried through. I'm a little weary of what's going on right now because of what my 60 minute is saying. If we go back to the 4 hour, the 4 hour is not saying what the 1 hour is saying. So if we did have kind of an agreement on the 4 hour, that would then start to help the case here on the 60 minute. And as we jump to the 30, we're also going to see the 30 is not giving us the same indication. So it could be that we're just getting kind of a false signal on the 1 hour because the two surrounding time frames are not agreeing. So let's jump to our 30-minute chart and see what that's doing now. We have that bullish indication off the low down here. Got the big push in the pre-market here. And now that we're up right around 41.24, we really do not have the same indication that we do on the 1 hour. So you can see we pushed to make a lower high compared to the previous swing high, but we also pushed to make a lower high on RVI. And so that 60-minute indication, I'll definitely keep in mind, but I don't have agreement on either side from the higher time frame and the lower time frame, and so I don't think it has as much weight. So that's our 30-minute right now. Still on pretty much a lot of the time frames, we were getting this bullish signal off the low, and here we are up over 20 points from that low. Outside of that, I don't think there's really much else to be said from the 30-minute perspective. Of course, I'm glad that we're not in all the chop from yesterday. Yesterday was actually a really tough day to trade unless you were just trading the extremes on the highs and the lows and somehow pinpointing an entry. Other than that, it was really sloppy. It reminded me back of April 7th over here, where you can see we chopped around in what happened to be like a 10-15 point range all day, and that was really it. Even into the close, there was really not a lot of movement. And then yesterday, same situation where really once we opened in the market, we were bouncing between maybe a 15-20 point range, and then right around 12, an hour before the close, then we started to get this really strong bull push, and then we made a slightly higher all-time high compared to the previous day. So just a little bit higher. And then now it's looking, in my opinion, it looked like we were going to maybe have a significant sell-off here when I got up this morning. But sure enough, off of that 4:30 Pacific time low, the bulls just jumped right back in. And so still looking pretty bullish here. Let's go to the 10-minute now. And so the 10-minute is agreeing with the 60-minute, so it's getting a little messy. Remember that on some mornings, we're going to have a complete agreement on all time frames. And when we have agreement on all time frames, we have a really good assurance of what the market is going to do. Right now, we do have kind of some two stories going on here. We have the 10-minute and the 1 hour giving us a bit of bearishness off of the new high we made just now. And then every other time frame is just giving us that bullish indication off the low with no indication of exhaustion here. So I'm a little skeptical that that is going to be the high right now because I don't have agreement on all time frames. We are, to be fair to myself here, we are in the same basic chop area that we've been in all week now. So all week has really been a day and then the Globex, which hasn't been a lot. But you can see that we've chopped around basically between 41.20 and 41, call it 41.05. And we're still kind of in all that garbage. So still kind of a tough market to be reading from whatever perspective you're looking at. Now, if you were to look at this from like an order flow perspective, we definitely have we're building out the profile here and really getting probably a pretty balanced market right in this area from 41.04 to 41.24. But outside of that, really no great confluence of every time frame to give us a good indication. What I will point out here is from the 10-minute perspective, we also have that bullish indication. So I like that the fact that pretty much every time frame is giving us a bullish indication off the low. And then this little bit of bearishness that we got on 2 of the time frames is probably not telling us that's not going to be the high. We might get a little bit more of a pullback, but we should then go ahead to push up and test the all-time high. Now we're getting close to the open here, so I do want to just jump through one more time, just so everyone is not confused here of what we're kind of seeing overall. And I have to find some of these time charts. They seem to have hidden themselves here. Okay, so remember, super high time frames, no indication of reversal. The daily might start to show a sign of reversal if we can't push up here. The 4-hour gave us a sign of reversal, but now we've recovered from that. And actually, if you look from the 4-hour perspective, we pushed to make that lower low, but actually made a higher low here on the indicator. So once we get out of the daily, now we have enough resolution to look at the lows here on this price movement, and pretty much every single time frame gave us a bullish indication off the low. Okay, so overall we have a bullish bias coming into the open because of that. And I do want to look at the super short time frames here just to see what's going on. So to sum it everything up, we have a pretty strong bullish bias, at least off of that overnight low. And we only have indications of a little bit of exhaustion on this push up on some random time frame. So I'm skeptical of this being the high right now. And what I really want to be looking for are longs on the pullback at important levels. So we looked at every time frame down to the 10-minute. Let's just see really quickly as we come into the open what our short time frames are telling us. And currently we had a little bit of exhaustion off the high, kind of like what we saw on the 10-minute and the 1-hour. And that has led to what we see here, just a small pullback so far. And, you know, with a 3-minute and a 10-minute giving us an indication, depending on what kind of market you're in, you typically will see at least a 10-point pullback. That does not have to happen, but just over time, I've noticed if you have a 3-minute and 10-minute agreeing, you typically will at least get 10-point moves from the point where it was formed. So maybe we get a pullback to 50%. Maybe we get right over into test this resistance in the market from the overnight. We'll have to watch here. But 3-minute has a bit of exhaustion off the high. And remember, 3-minute are just short time frame things, not overarching huge moves.